At $10,000, a 7% return produces $700. At $100,000, the same return produces $7,000. At $500,000, it produces $35,000. The percentage never changed. But somewhere along the way, your money stopped feeling like a number on a screen and started behaving like a second worker. That is why people say net worth skyrockets after $100,000. But the headline hides something important. There is no secret switch at 100,000. And for some people, crossing it changes almost nothing. Subscribe for more stories where money reveals what people are really like. Imagine your financial life as a small workshop. At the beginning, there is only one worker inside it, you. You earn the income. You control the spending. You move a small part of every paycheck into savings or investments. If you invest $10,000 and use a hypothetical 7% annual return, the portfolio adds about $700 over 1 year. That is useful. But compared with the $10,000 you contributed from work, it barely changes the picture. Your behavior is doing almost all the heavy lifting. This is why the beginning feels so slow. You are not only building wealth. You are building the machine that may eventually help build wealth for you. And machines are unimpressive while they are still being assembled. Suppose someone starts from zero, contributes $10,000 at the end of every year, and receives a perfectly smooth 7% annual return. Real markets do not move smoothly, taxes and fees matter, and no return is guaranteed. But the simplified example makes the mechanism visible. Under those assumptions, reaching the first $100,000 takes about 7.8 years. During most of that period, contributions matter more than growth. The person can improve the result by earning more, saving more, or giving the money more time. But there is no dramatic return carrying the portfolio forward. A 7% return on a small base is still a small dollar amount. This is the part that discourages people. They make a responsible decision for months and see only a modest change. The process feels linear because their deposits are still larger than the portfolio's growth. But beneath that slow progress, the base is expanding. And percentage growth cares about the base. At $100,000, the hypothetical 7% return becomes $7,000. The person is still contributing $10,000 from work. But now the portfolio can add an amount equal to 70% of that annual contribution. The workshop no longer has one worker. Your income is still carrying the larger box. But your capital has picked up the other side. At roughly $142,857, a hypothetical 7% return equals $10,000. That is the crossover in this particular example. The portfolio's annual growth becomes as large as the person's annual contribution. Again, real returns do not arrive in a straight line. Some years may be positive, others negative. But mathematically, a larger invested base makes the same percentage more powerful in dollar terms. 100,000 is memorable not because nature recognizes the number, but because it is close to the point where capital begins competing with a realistic annual saving amount. Now look at the milestones. Using the same simplified assumptions, 10,000 contributed each year and a smooth 7% return, the journey from 0 to 100,000 takes about 7.8 years. The journey from 100,000 to 200,000 takes about 5.1 years. 200,000 to 300,000 takes about 3.8 years. 300,000 to 400,000 takes about 3 years. The person did not suddenly become twice as disciplined. The annual contribution did not increase. The assumed percentage return stayed exactly the same. What changed was the amount already working. Growth from earlier years remains in the portfolio. Future returns can then be earned on the original contributions and on previous returns. That is compound growth, returns beginning to produce returns of their own. The first 100,000 feels like pushing a stone uphill. Later, the stone has not become weightless. But now gravity is beginning to pull in the same direction. There is one problem with saying, net worth skyrockets after 100,000. Net worth is everything you own minus everything you owe. Two people can each have a net worth of $100,000 and be in completely different situations. One may have the full amount in a diversified long-term investment portfolio. Another may have it entirely as equity in a home. A third may own a small business valued at $100,000 but have very little available cash. Those assets do not grow in the same way. They are not equally liquid. They do not carry the same risk. So when we use the 7% example, we are talking about invested capital under a hypothetical return, not every dollar included in someone's net worth. The milestone is also less meaningful if high-interest debt is growing on the other side of the balance sheet. The correct lesson is not that every person becomes financially unstoppable at exactly $100,000. It is that percentage growth becomes more visible as the productive base becomes larger. Compounding is powerful, but it should not become an excuse to underestimate saving behavior. Vanguard studied how much ending portfolio value came from savings versus investment returns under a hypothetical 4% real return. Over 2 years, savings accounted for about 94% of the ending value. Over 10 years, the figure was still about 80%. Even over 30 years, savings contributed about 51% and returns about 49% in that illustration. The exact percentages depend on assumptions, but the message is important. Returns do not rescue a plan that receives no fuel. The first 100,000 usually represents more than an account balance. It often means someone learned to spend below their income, contribute repeatedly, ignore some short-term temptation, and remain consistent when the result looked unimpressive. The mathematical machine matters. But the behavior built the machine. There is another part that viral explanations often leave out. Larger balances do not only create larger gains. They also create larger visible losses. A 20% decline on $10,000 is $2,000. The same decline on $100,000 is $20,000. At $500,000, it is $100,000. That does not mean long-term investing is automatically wrong. It means returns are compensation for accepting uncertainty, and real portfolios fluctuate. As the numbers grow, discipline changes form. At the beginning, discipline means finding money to contribute. Later, it can mean not panicking when a normal percentage decline suddenly looks like several years of salary. Your money becomes a stronger worker. It also becomes a worker whose results you cannot command every year. $100,000 is not a finish line, and it is not a guarantee that wealth will now arrive quickly. It is a scale where compounding becomes easier to notice. At $10,000, your habits dominate the result. At $100,000, your habits still matter, but the capital begins contributing a meaningful second stream of progress. At larger balances, the relationship continues to shift. The person keeps working, saving, and making decisions. But the money already accumulated can carry more of the load. That is why the first 100,000 is often described as the hardest. Not because everything after it is easy, but because before it, you are pushing almost alone. After it, time and capital begin pushing with you. So the real question is not whether 100,000 activates a secret wealth switch. It is this. At what point does your money begin contributing as much as you do? In our example, with $10,000 saved each year and a hypothetical 7% return, that point is closer to $143,000. Change the contribution or return assumption, and the crossover changes too. The principle does not. Before the milestone, behavior does most of the work. After it, behavior and capital begin working together. If you are building toward your first 100,000, write "first" in the comments. If you have crossed it, write the financial lesson that mattered most, not the investment you bought, but the behavior that got you there. Subscribe for the next story.